Please give a warm welcome to our guest, Jay Cranman.
Thank you. I appreciate it. How are you guys doing today? Can you hear me all right? I tend to talk loud, so if someone adjusts my volume, if I get too loud, y'all can just look at me and point like this. So let's dispense with this. My name is not Jenny. I'm not Super Jenny. If you came here to learn about a wonderful restaurant empire that got started here in Atlanta, about urban farming, about how to make great chicken soup, then you're in the wrong room, because I can barely boil water. But what I am here to talk to you today about is some of the work that I've been doing at Hands On Atlanta. And just by show of hands, how many of you here have ever volunteered with us at Hands On Atlanta? 1, 2, 3. All right. How many of you here volunteer, would you say, on a regular basis? All right. There's some more hands. Who, I'm not going to call on people, but would someone like to just volunteer? I'd like to just learn a little bit about some of the stuff y'all are already doing in the community. So for one of you that were just raising your hand that you do currently volunteer on a regular basis, who would like to share kind of what they're doing? Yes, sir.
I do software development for nonprofits.
Awesome. What's your name?
Andre.
Andre. Thanks, Andre. Yes, ma'am.
I do the college program at CHILA.
Okay. Tell me, what does that mean?
In children's healthcare, they have a program just for college students. It's 3 hours a week.
Okay. Awesome. Somebody else? In the back. Speak up just a little bit. Very cool. All right, one or two more. Yes, ma'am.
I volunteer with hackathon. We go to concerts and sign people up to vote.
That's awesome. How long have you been doing that?
For about a year. It's like nonpartisan. It's all very different.
Just getting the vote out. That's incredible. All right, one more. Anybody else feel like you're actually doing something right now in the Atlanta community or in your community? You're volunteering regularly? Yes, sir. Thank you. It was going to be awkward if I waited too much longer. Go ahead.
I work as a waiter at Cafe 458.
Yeah, will you tell everyone, does everyone know what Cafe 458 is? Can you just tell everyone what it is really quick?
Yeah, sure. Cafe 458 is the subsidiary of Atlanta Center for Self-Sufficiency, which helps Atlanta's homeless get back on their feet through job training programs. And it's open, Cafe 458 is open on Sundays to the public, and they're staffed by volunteers. All of the tips and proceeds go towards the parent organization.
Thank you for that. What is your name?
Cindy.
Thanks, Simi. So my hope at the end of today's talk is that if you didn't raise your hand, if you said that you're not currently volunteering regularly, that hopefully you'll learn something in the talk today that might inspire you to get more active in our Atlanta community. And I thought what I would do is share a little bit of some of the trends that we're seeing at Hands On Atlanta, some of the things that we think are going to really disrupt the world of service and volunteerism over the next, let's say, 10 years. So that's how I was planning to use my time today. I'm sorry if you were hoping to get a great chicken chili recipe. So let me just start by saying that the aspect ratio on this is all off, but that's fine. We'll just kind of roll with it. So that's all kind of squished. There's a lot of stuff in Atlanta that I love. These are some of the lists. So the Atlanta United, we have a great culture. We have the birth of the civil rights movement. What are some of the things that you guys, well, out of curiosity, raise your hand if you grew up in Atlanta or you all are in Atlanta, but you grew up in Atlanta. So what's something in Atlanta you love?
The Atlanta Hawks.
The Hawks, all right. You're wearing the jersey, I like it, the shirt. Someone else, yeah.
The diversity.
Diversity, what does that mean to you? So diversity, different cultures. Someone on this side? No one over on here likes anything about Atlanta? All right, yes, sir?
I like the climate, the trees.
The climate, the canopy, the environment. Yeah, so there's a lot to like about Atlanta. We have an incredible diverse economy. We're I think, the 12th largest GDP of any market. We have a number of Fortune 500 businesses. We have incredible diversity. We have a really amazing climate. But that's really only half the story. And so I want to tell just a couple of things about Atlanta that y'all may not already know. And so that's some of the challenges in our community. And so let's dive in. So right now, if you're standing in this room or you're sitting in this room, You're doing something that 600,000 people in Atlanta can't do. Does anyone want to take a gander for what that is? Say that again louder. Go to school. No, that is not correct, although you might be. Yes, sir, in the back. Afford college. That's not what I'm looking for. Yes, sir, in the hat. It is reading. That's right. Literacy in Atlanta is one of our most significant challenges. Right now, 1 in 7 adults in our city cannot read. That's a generous ratio. If you consider low literacy, it's more like 1 in 4. When you're talking about youth, a lot of times in the education space, we talk about third grade reading. Does anyone know why third grade reading is such like the magic metric when it comes to kids? Anyone want to take a guess? Why in our work? Yes, ma'am.
The literacy rate depends on what they're planning for prison capacity in the future.
That's great. Can you explain what that means again?
So what the literacy rate is at third grade, depending on who's under that, the literacy rate or lack thereof is what they use to plan for prison capacity in the future.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you're running a prison today, all you need to do is look at what is the third grade reading achievement, and you can determine what your capacity is going to need to be for your prison over the next 15 years. But that's actually, that's a true statement. But really, the reason that third grade reading is so important is because up until third grade, you're teaching kids how to read. You're teaching them you're teaching them how to read. But at third grade, you start learning by reading. So up until then, it's learning to read, and at third grade, you're reading to learn. And it's this real pivot point in our educational system that means that if you get behind at third grade, if you can't read appropriately at third grade, then it's near impossible to catch up and ultimately have educational outcomes. So that's one big challenge in Atlanta. Let's talk about another one. Let's talk about homelessness. What do you all think is the average age of a homeless person in Atlanta? 24, thank you. In the back? 30. Guys, just for the record, if we were keeping score, this side would not be doing well. So just wanted to throw that out there. Someone throw a number out. What's the average age of a homeless person in Atlanta? 12. 13. 27. You're all too old. It is not 18. It's 9. The average age of a homeless person in Atlanta is 9 years old. Would you be surprised to learn that Atlanta is number 1 when it comes to kids who are living in poverty? We have more kids living in poverty in Atlanta than in any other city in the U.S. That's not certainly a top of the list that we want to be on top of. There are a lot of issues when it comes to poverty in Atlanta. How many kids do you think right now live in what's called a food insecure household? That means that they literally don't know where their next meal is going to come from. In the tie. You're wearing a tie. I like that.
Thank you.
We'll say 1 in how many kids? We'll make it easy. Like not a number, but 1 in how many? 1 in 3. Who else wants to take a guess? 33%. Who else? 1 in 5. 20%? 40%. Yeah, so the number is 1 out of 4. In Atlanta, within a stone's throw from here, there are roughly 300,000 kids who live in what's called a food insecure household. And to give you some perspective, that's a big number. 1 in 2, 1 in 3, 1 in 5. 1 in 4 is a big number. You could fill the new Mercedes-Benz Stadium 4 times over with just kids who every day don't know where their next meal is going to come from. That's in our city. That's not halfway around the world. That's right here in Atlanta. Our schools are also broken. So what percentage of kids, I mentioned how the importance of third grade reading, what percentage of our kids right now in Atlanta public schools do you think are significantly behind when it comes to third grade reading or math? Who said that? 1 in what?
1 in 3.
It's almost right. About 40%, 40 to 50% of our kids right now in Atlanta public schools, and I just explained how important reading at third grade on level is, we have about 50% of our kids are falling behind. 30%, 33% is dropping out of school before they attain their high school graduation. So suffice it to say, there are some really significant challenges in our community. It's not only the good things, but you cannot be thriving in a city when half your people are being left behind. Right now in Atlanta, if you are born poor, you have a 97% chance of dying poor in our city. There's not a tremendous amount of opportunity. At the same time as these challenges are impacting our community, there are a couple of other trends that are out there. One of these trends is doing more with less. Every traditional institution, whether it be a nonprofit, a government, a school, even businesses, are living with this mantra of consistently having to do more with less. And that push to do more means that nonprofits and governments are having to figure out a way to engage people in their problem solving. And so that's driving this change in the way that society is demanding much more from the world of volunteerism. The good news is that people today want to help more than ever. We're seeing this in our work. You guys and the millennial generation are driving a lot of this increase in the interest in people to giving back. I put this other thing up there as well. It's not just individuals, because I wanted to remember to say this, that the nonprofit sector is growing. Over the last 10 years, the for-profit sector grew at about 2 to 3%. The nonprofit sector has grown at 20%. There are now 1.5 million nonprofits in the U.S. alone. I'll give you guys one other question, but the size of the nonprofit sector. Do you guys think, raise your hand if you think that, how can I phrase this? Which is bigger, the GDP created by the nonprofit sector or the GDP created by, let's say, the federal government? Consider all your military spending, healthcare spending, all of your government spending at the federal level. What do you guys think is better, the nonprofit sector or the federal government? Where I heard it back there? You think nonprofit? Does anyone feel it's the federal government? A couple of y'all? Yeah, it's the nonprofit sector. The nonprofit sector currently accounts for about $900 billion of our GDP, about 6%. The federal government's about 5%. The nonprofit sector is absolutely growing, and it's being driven by this desire to do more. So our institutions are doing more with less. Our government isn't able to pick up the gap. The nonprofit sector is stepping into that void. People like you in this room are really excited to get involved. So there's more and more nonprofits, but there's more and more people who are wanting to be involved in that problem solving. So on one hand, you have all of these incredible community needs, and then on the other hand, you have all of these individuals who want to give back, and that's the work that we've been doing at Hands On Atlanta for the last 28 years. This year, we'll mobilize somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30,000 people to do close to 200,000 hours worth of service. We've become one of the largest volunteer organizations in the world, and it started with very humble beginnings by a number of young professionals just like yourselves in this room. We do that work with about 150 nonprofit partners and across maybe 3,000 or 4,000 projects every single year. And at the end of the day, all we're doing is we're connecting the interest of the individuals, of our corporations, of groups, of churches who have a desire to give back to the community, and then the needs of the nonprofit sector here in Atlanta. That's a little bit about us. So let me tell you a little bit about what I think are some of these mega trends that I think are going to change the way in which you as individuals are going to give back to your communities over the next 10 years. And I'll start with this one. I see that nonprofits are no longer going to hold a monopoly on what it means to do good. So for-profit organizations are quickly becoming the biggest competitors to the nonprofit sector. And the difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit is getting very, very fuzzy. I'm going to show you a quick video, a quick commercial, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what this means. Let's see if this works. All right, I'll show you the ending in a second. If you've seen this commercial, I'll ask you not to ask. I want you all to take a guess. Who is this a commercial for? How many of you have seen this commercial already and you know the answer? All right, so I'm going to ask you guys to not answer. So if you haven't seen this commercial, I want you just to take a guess. What brand do you think this is a commercial for? Yes, sir. McDonald's? No. Don't laugh if you haven't guessed. Yes? UNICEF? No. So a nonprofit. Someone out back there have a... Yeah. Amazon? No. Yeah. Coca-Cola? No, good guess. No, it should be. I wish. Yeah? Joy Williams? It's a Chainsmokers song. The artist singing it, her name's Joy Williams out of Nashville, but no, this isn't her music video. In the back? Yeah. Facebook? No. Someone over here, guys, come on. You really got to step up your game. It's becoming embarrassing. I'm going to start calling on people. Take a guess. Somebody on the side, not in the front row. Care? Nonprofit care?
Yeah.
No. All right, I'll let y'all watch the end, and we'll see. None of y'all got it right.
You can lift the weight of caring by doing. Visit State Farm's neighborhoodofgood.com to volunteer in your community.
So someone want to take it, why is State Farm running this commercial during the Super Bowl? Yes, sir.
Because they want you to think they're a good neighbor.
They want you to think they're a good neighbor. Somebody else, add to that. Blue shirt.
Yeah, I was kind of building off of that, but if they can generate good publicity, then that could be good for their company.
Okay, so just good publicity. Yes, sir.
Or that if you don't have insurance, you might end up like the people that were in the ground.
A cautionary tale. Okay. Don't be the homeless guy on the street. Buy insurance. Yeah. So you have an insurance company investing millions of dollars to run an advertisement that should have been a commercial for Hands On Atlanta. The first time I saw this, I literally wanted to take this back screen and just be like, come visit Hands On Atlanta. Like this is I think it's a really it's a beautifully shot and I think made commercial about how do people turn their caring into action? Like I talk about how do people turn their good intentions into impact? They had a more pithy advertising take on that. So what's happening here? Like why is a company investing, millions of dollars to create a commercial that actually doesn't sell their product, but engages people to go do volunteerism in their communities? Like is anyone here in the marketing or in the business school? All right, so what's going on? If you're a marketer, why are you going to invest your marketing dollars to drive this message?
Corporate social responsibility.
Say that again?
Corporate social responsibility.
What does that mean?
So basically, it would help their reputation as a company to do charity work or promote volunteerism because it shows that they're human and they're not just money hungry and trying to actually help the community rather than just take money.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, sir, in the green shirt.
I think that also they're a life insurance company, so if you're promoting your community to invest in itself, then you're going to potentially have more customers in the future.
Okay. Yes, in the back. Positive Sentiment Association. Can you explain what that means? Okay. Yeah. Yes.
I think it's also important, them being an insurance company, like it a lot of times has a negative connotation. It's expensive and sometimes, life insurance is used, but sometimes you don't use all of your insurance or you feel like insurance companies like rip you off. So.
Okay. So this is battling the perception they might have as a negative perception. Yeah, in the glasses here.
Yeah, I think it's just developing some of the sides that the corporate or State Farm actually believes in, and they can build on the trust of the customers, and they can have
Okay. It's a differentiator for them with their customer. Yeah.
They're making donations to organisms and want to show that they are making those donations.
Okay. One other? Yes.
Yes, adding to the CSR point, what I've seen over here is that people, the companies who are actually putting in effort into the corporate social responsibility part of their companies, people think that they're doing it for their reputation, but that's not entirely true. Given the company is taking resources from the entire economy, they have to give back. So this might be an effort too.
So this is part of the social contract that they have. That, hey, part of doing business in our community is that you need to find a way to give back to the community. I mean, all of you guys have hit on things that are right. And is this unique? Have you guys seen more organizations that are using their advertising dollars to try to drive a social or an environmental issue? Yeah? Who said Coke earlier? Who they thought it was the Coca-Cola company, right? Like Coca-Cola company, there was a lumber company. I'm thinking of just the Super Bowl alone. There were 5 or 6 organizations that invested millions of dollars to drive messaging around immigration, around refugee populations, around Black Lives Matter, around other issues. So, as I think about the future of our world of civic engagement, I think there's 2 ways in which for-profits are going to start really competing. Number one is in this way. You're going to have marketing dollars that are going to go towards engaging these organizations' customers and their stakeholders directly in their CSR, directly in their corporate social responsibility initiatives. So if they're about water, if you're Coca-Cola and you're about water, women, and well-being, you're going to start using some of your marketing dollars to try to drive your consumers to know more about those social investments, because at the end of the day, we're all purpose buyers. It's been proven that we as consumers want to buy products from companies that we feel match our values and give back to our communities. So that's one way in which a for-profit is going to compete directly. The second way is a little different, because while State Farm is doing great work and they're a fantastic insurance company, they're not necessarily a social enterprise. Have y'all heard that phrase, social enterprise? I heard a yes up in the front, but they're professors, so we're not going to take their word for it. Has anyone else in the room ever heard the phrase social enterprise? Yes, ma'am. Hey.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
So, a social enterprise is basically a company that doesn't have to look at the final dollar. They kind of, or when they make their profit, they try to use the profit for good instead of just to make everybody rich.
Okay, so for those in the back, she said it's an organization that maybe uses their profit not just to generate wealth for the owners, but also to do some kind of good. Who wants to add to that? What else is a definition of a social enterprise? A for-profit social enterprise. So have you guys ever heard of Tom's Shoes? So some nodding. What is Tom's Shoes doing? Say that louder. Yeah, buy one, give one, right? Who are the shoes going to? Yep, so are they doing that as a for-profit? Are they a for-profit or a non-profit? They're a for-profit, right? So they're selling shoes, but then they're giving away shoes, right? Now there's a lot of arguments to whether or not this is truly driving impact, but they're an example of a for-profit social enterprise. So there has been an abundance of for-profit social enterprises. These are for-profit organizations who have found a way to solve a social or environmental problem through a traditional business model, right? So if you today were trying to go out into the world and solve a social issue, you could do it as a nonprofit and you can go compete for all of the philanthropy that exists, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Or you could try to do it as a for-profit. You could go try to find a business model where your profits exceed your expenses and you can generate a return for your investors. And this is blowing up. There are more and more for-profit social enterprises, and the blurred line between those organizations, it's getting really, really difficult to tell them apart. For a number of years, I ran an investment fund for an organization called Points of Light, and we invested directly in early stage startups, either for-profit or nonprofit. We would try in the accelerator program to have a mix of both. And there was a moment when we were out in Silicon Valley and we had all of our teams pitching to a room full of venture capitalists. And at the end of the night, we had each of the venture capitalists go and vote, basically with a Post-it note, who they thought was the most investable and who they thought was the best pitch and some other categories. And it was a nonprofit in Silicon Valley that won the most investable venture. And I think you're going to continue to find it's really, really difficult. If I were to stand up here and talk to you about some of their business models, it'd be really hard to determine whether they're a for-profit or whether they're a nonprofit. And so when I think about the next 10 years, I think this is going to be a continuing trend that for-profit organizations are going to continue to find a way to compete with nonprofits. We in the nonprofit sector no longer have a monopoly on doing good. This is the second trend. I think volunteering is going to go virtual. Much like Amazon is disrupted big box retailers, online volunteer platforms are going to be disrupting big box nonprofits. And so I have to have a chart. So here's my chart to share with you guys. On the left-hand side, we have, or on the x-axis, you have the amount of time that an individual is willing to invest in doing something good. And on the y-axis, you have the number of opportunities that currently exist for them to do so. On the left-hand side, what you have is 1,000,001 ways to use a minute right now to pull out your phones and you can give money. I could have you guys send a tweet, and with that tweet, you can make a pledge to a nonprofit. It is very, very easy right now to give money and to spend just a minute to do so. And on the other side of the spectrum, if you've got a half a day or a year, if you want to go to the Peace Corps, there's 1.5 million nonprofits right now that exist in this country that can take your time and use it in a very intentional and a high-value way. But in the middle, there is a real gap. And there are very few players who are starting to play in this space. There's folks like Purposity and Verb and Career Village and some other organizations who are trying to say, how can we turn people's attention when they're standing at the line at Starbucks and they have their mobile phone? Or how can I use somebody who can't get out to the volunteer site, but they're at home and they have a laptop? Or if you're working at NCR or Amazon or Google and you're on a help desk and you only get a 15-minute break, how can you use that 15 minutes to do something good in the community? And this is the area where I feel like the innovations are going to happen. And it's my hypothesis that in the next 10 years, the number of hours that people are volunteering online is going to surpass the number of hours people are volunteering right now in person. And in no way am I suggesting that it is better to be online, but I think the analogy would be a phone call. Right now, we don't not meet if we can't see each other in person. We all know that meeting in person is a much better outcome. You get a lot more social capital, you get a lot more feedback, you can see body language. The in-person interaction, if you're going to meet with somebody in person, is just better. But if you can't meet in person, we have all other kinds of mechanisms. We have webinars, we have phone calls, we have email. You have a number of ways in which technology has really increased productivity. And I think the same is going to happen in the volunteering space. We at Hands on Atlanta are going to continue to take your half days and take your hours and get you out of your offices and out of your classrooms and off your couches and get you into the community, because that's where we think the biggest impact is going to happen. But we also need to start building for the online future, and this is an area that I think, and I'm really excited about. I think it's going to grow a lot. The last trend that I'll talk about is I see investing as being the new philanthropy. And what I mean by that is that people today want to see their money, or I would say this, the relationship they have with their money is changing. And right now, there's a gap between what people think of as their philanthropy and what people think of as their investments. And very rarely do the two ever intersect. Over the next 10 years, that's going to be changing. Let me ask you all this. How much money in the US is currently given in philanthropy? So the total number invested by every church, by every individual, by every company, by every foundation, how much money do you think is currently given away in the US every year in philanthropy? 1 trillion. Who else? $500 billion. 500 billion. Yes, sir.
2.5 trillion.
Say it?
2.5.
2.5 trillion. Somebody else? No, all of y'all are way high. 50 million. Billion. 50 billion. With a B. Say it? 1 billion. 20 million? Billion. So it's in between the two. So this year in the US, about $375 billion will be given away by individuals. Now, across the world, we are by far one of the most charitable communities on earth. It's an incredible number, but the challenge is that we're dealing with trillion-dollar problems. So whoever started us off and anchored us at the 1 trillion level, that's where we need to be. Right? If we want to solve sex trafficking, you want to solve child hunger, you want to solve literacy, we need to be generating trillions of dollars need to be going into this. But we can't get there because $375 billion is about the same amount that was given away over the last 10 years. It has not gone up. But as I mentioned early in my talk, the number of nonprofits has absolutely skyrocketed. And so there's a resource constraint in the number and the amount of philanthropy. So when we were making investments, if someone came to us and said, hey, I've got a great startup and we're going to be traditionally funded, we're going to go after foundations and individual donations, we would tend to say, no, we're not going to invest because we didn't believe that there was enough philanthropy out there to actually drive significant innovation and really scale an organization. There's already so much competition that the answer for us was always in the earned revenue, was on the for-profit, kind of the business model side, so actually generating a fee for a service or doing something else. So if we have to get to $1 trillion, but we're only at $375 billion in philanthropy going into our nonprofit sector, I think the answer is going to come out of the investments. It's going to come when all of you get to open up your Vanguard accounts when you start your jobs, and instead of investing in like a balanced portfolio of simply S&P 500 stocks, you're going to be able to invest in the Clean Water Fund or the Employment and West Side Fund, or whatever the fund is, which is going to be a series of investments that are going directly into driving social value instead of simply business value. And that's going to change the game entirely. There are some estimates that say that the total number of impact investment dollars going directly into an impact outcome, but for a for-profit return, it's called impact investing, is going to exceed the total amount of philanthropy over the next several years. So by 2020 or 2022, some estimates have us as high as $500 billion in impact investing. So you extrapolate that out, it becomes a really, really exciting opportunity. So those are the three trends that I think are really going to drastically change the way that you are all engaging in your community. The way you're using your time is going to change because it's going to be online. The way you're using your investments is going to change because your philanthropy, your ideas of how you use your money is going to change. And the way you use your talents are going to change because it's going to be a lot more skills-based instead of in person. Now, before I open it up for questions, I want to finish. We just did some rebranding. This is our new tagline, to do something good. And I can't stand up here on stage and not make my pitch to all of you. And I hope that for all of you that didn't raise your hand at the beginning to say that you're really invested in some way in the community, I would implore you to do so. If you're sitting in this room, it means that you're one of the winners in our society. Like, you are already, when you graduate as an undergraduate from Georgia Tech, going to be in the top 5 wage earners across the globe. You've won in this game. And there is a tremendous amount of responsibility that comes with being in that kind of position. And I would implore you to find a way to use your talents, to use your intellect, to use the opportunities presented to you on this campus and above and beyond, to find a way to get involved in an issue in our city. We as a society have somehow decided that it is okay if there are kids going hungry, that it is okay for us that our average age of a homeless kid right now is 9 years old in our city. That is not okay to me. The answer has to be engaging more people. There are so many amazing nonprofits in Atlanta. Some of you talked about some of them and the work you're already doing with them. Talk to your peers and get them more involved in Cafe 458 and others. There are so many incredible organizations across our city. They are filling the gap. They are meeting this need of all of our constituents that are being left behind. And I would ask you to really think about, how can you help? What is something that you could do? So what is something that's close to your heart? What is an issue that you care about? And then go out there and get involved. And I promise that if you do so, there are so many incredible leadership skills and unexpected benefits that come out of volunteering that you are going to find you are a happier, more fulfilled, more purpose-driven. You're going to achieve a lot more of your objectives. You're going to be networking with people that you want to have in your lives. There are so many amazing benefits to you as an individual for volunteering, not even to mention the impact that you can have on our kids and our communities and on our people in our community. So with that said, I think if I left some time, we should still have about 20 minutes to just answer some questions and just to get into a good conversation. All right, so who's going to ask me the really hard questions? We'll start here in the back. Yeah, in the purple.
Hi. First of all, thank you. That was a really interesting presentation. I was wondering, so non-profit organizations, what kind of business model can they have that's different from traditional models? And I'm always curious, like, how do they get money and how are they sustainable?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are a number of ways in which nonprofit, so what is the difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit? Does anyone know? Yes, sir. Yeah, so he said the profits are kept internal versus sharing with the owners. The only difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit is the legal structure. A for-profit organization is owned by shareholders, and any profits can be used to generate wealth and or recompensate those shareholders for their equity. There is no equity in a nonprofit. Literally, the community owns a nonprofit. So any profits that are generated from the businesses of a nonprofit simply have to go back into achieving that organization's mission. And so the only difference when you're thinking about a for-profit and nonprofit, the only obstacle to creative business models is your creativity. I'll give you some examples of what we do at Hands On Atlanta. So I have about a $5 million annual operating budget. About 1/3 of that is federal funding. So we have a really large AmeriCorps program. Is anyone an AmeriCorps alum? Does anyone know what AmeriCorps is? I saw a nod. So what's AmeriCorps?
It's like Peace Corps, but it's here in the United States.
Perfect.
Working on the community, whatever.
Perfect. Yes. We're a domestic Peace Corps. So it's been around for about 20 years. About 1 million people have come through AmeriCorps. At Hands On Atlanta, we have the second largest AmeriCorps program in the state of Georgia. We have 30 people that are working every day as tutors and mentors right now in Atlanta public schools, helping to get kids back on track. So 1/3 of my funding is government funding, fee for service. I staff individuals. I'm a staffing company. I staff individuals in Atlanta public schools. And then there's a cost share. The school pays us a piece and the federal government pays us a piece. Another third is straight up philanthropy. I ask people like you every day to give us money. And that's it, right? I go out there in the community, I talk to high net worth individuals, I talk to foundations, I tell them about the work we're doing, I tell them about the issues in the community, about the needs to kind of market more volunteer opportunities, about the nonprofits that are grassroots who have needs, and I try to make the case for their philanthropy. And then the middle third is really fee for service. It's earned revenue. And so companies predominantly is who funds us in that regard. They have a need. They have employees. All of you are going to be working in a company, and all of you are going to want to give back to the community. You're all going to want to be doing volunteer opportunities. You're all going to want to be, just like you want to be a consumer of a company that matches your values, you want to work at a company that matches your values. You're going to want to be working. If you're a lawyer, you're going to want to be doing the pro bono efforts. If you're a consultant, you're going to want to be working on really cool pro bono consulting gigs. If you're at Coca-Cola, you're going to want to be involved in their water or wellness initiatives. So every company right now has a need to engage their employees in service. Some of those companies have brought that work in-house. They have staff every day that their entire job is to run what's called their employee volunteer program. It's usually part of their HR, or it could be part of their foundation. It could be organized in a couple of ways. Some organizations have decided that that's not their core functionality, and instead they outsource that. And when they decide to outsource it, they outsource it to organizations like mine. So the next time, so an example, 2 days ago, LexisNexis wanted to have an employee volunteer project for 500 of their employees. They wanted to do it on site, and they didn't want to do anything else they had done over the last 10 years. And so they bring that challenge to myself and my team, and it's my team's job to figure out what are we going to do with 500 people that they've never done before, that it can be done in their parking lot, and this is key, is actually something the community needs. Because we're not about to go do what we call greenwashing, which is just, hey, let's go paint that fence, and it was just painted yesterday, right? It's got to be an authentic need in our community. And so my team comes up with these volunteer projects. We're a bunch of creative event planners, and then we get funded. So then LexisNexis gives us the money to pay for all the supplies that would go into that project, and then the time for our team to actually organize and then facilitate. And then there's margin on top. We always bake in a little bit of gross margin to make sure that we can fund some of the work we want to do in the community that isn't fundable, or that the funding community has said isn't as valuable. So we do a lot of work with grassroots nonprofits that's really hard for us to fund, and so the profits we generate in one side of the business I use on the other side. So that's an example of how every nonprofit looks across their portfolio and they try to find a diversified revenue stream, and specifically how we use things like earned revenue to help drive it. That's a long answer, sorry. Other questions? We'll go in the back and then here, yeah. CEOOOOOOO. I love that shirt.
Thanks. You mentioned that part of the business is staffing. So did that come later on or earlier on in comparison to, I guess, like the organization? Like, was that something that you used to build, seeking out like actual donors and stuff, or was that something that kind of came post that? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, so the history of Hands On Atlanta is that about 12 friends got together at Manuel's Tavern over some beers, and they decided they wanted to try to make volunteering easier for themselves and their peers. And so they created Hands On Atlanta, they hired their first CEO, and they were off to the races. And the first projects were literally, they would stand in a park with a big poster board, and as people would drive by, they would try to get them to stop and actually get out and sign up to volunteer for a project at the food bank or at Trees Atlanta or at some other nonprofit in Atlanta that they had found had a need. And that was it, right? And so there's still a lot of the work in that regard that we do. But as we started to evolve and mature as an organization, we started to identify that our job is both to connect you all with the needs in the community, but it's also to kind of teach you a little bit about what the needs in the community are. Because if all I said was, hey, where do you want to go volunteer? Everyone wants to go to the Humane Society and pet dogs. And that may not be the biggest issue. I love that, and we do a lot of work with them. They're a great organization. We firmly stand behind it. But we also have kids who are going hungry on the street. And that is a bigger need, in my opinion. And so over the course of 28 years, we've gone from being kind of a shotgun approach to what are the issues in the community to being a little bit more of a sniper and saying we're picking specific fights. The fight that we're in right now is around youth development and education. And so about 2/3 of the nonprofits we support and the work we do is specifically tailored around schools and after-school programs. And so that's what's driven us a little bit more into a staffing model, because when we have full-time staff working in those schools, we can do a better job of using it as a beachhead for other programs. I think in the red shirt.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for your amazing presentation. As you mentioned, like online volunteering is one of the area which can bring breakthrough in this field and involve more volunteers to do something good.
Yeah.
So, being a president and CEO at Hands On Volunteer, what things you guys are doing in this particular area, like online volunteering, and what do you expect from engineers and business people like us to involve to do in this area?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The short answer is not enough. I would say this is a personal passion of mine. I spent some time in the startup world. I was a technology consultant in the early part of my career. And so I can see around the curve, I think, a little bit more than some of my peers and other affiliates around the world. So, we're not doing enough at Hands On Atlanta. And I think we're in this space of trying to figure out, or do we have to become a technology company? Because we're not. Can we partner with somebody else? Can we acquire the technology that's needed, or do we need to go build it? And there's a lot of, as you can imagine, there's going to be a tremendous amount of a need for an investment in building a technology solution that can, potentially disintermediate organizations like mine and some of the traditional work we've been doing. And so we've gotten, I would say a little bit better. I've only been the CEO for a year, and we've done a rebranding. We've launched a new website. We've done it on a better architecture that's allowing us to extend some of our services beyond kind of the previous technology stack that we were using. But I'm not near the point where I can say that I can actually, send you something on your phone via text or via link and use your time over 15 minutes or an hour in an intentional way. And I certainly can't do it at scale. If we're doing anything, it tends to be, and I think when I talk about online volunteering, people oftentimes feel like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. So I'll give you one example. We work with a lot of high schools in Atlanta, and most of those high school students don't have computer scientists and marketing folks in their families to ask questions about what are those careers like? How do I get into those careers? And so one of our partners is this organization called Career Village. They're a startup out of the Valley, and what they do is they go around to schools and they allow high school students to ask questions of working adults. And then they create a career plan that says, hey, if I want to get into be a crime scene investigator, or if I want to get to be a computer scientist, these are the steps I think I need to take. And then they ask folks who are actually in those careers to then review that career plan, review that resume, answer those questions. And so those kinds of micro-volunteer moments are very easily done in a kind of mobile phone or in an online setting, but they're rare and they're really hard to source. And so when I think about how do I get 20, 30, 40,000 people every year to do something, it's easy to figure out how do I get like a couple of kids to ask a couple of questions and then get a couple of adults to respond. It's hard when I start to think about how do we actually get something that's scalable and gets really interesting. But I would love more and more computer scientists to come work with us at Hands on Atlanta and help us figure out what that future might look like. Yes, here in the front.
Following with the question regarding the online services that could be offered, is Hands on Atlanta considering crowdsourcing in its volunteer-based program? And an idea for that would be, for example, creating an app where you would have volunteers logging in as a volunteer and keeping all your and the work, the community work that's available, and sort of linking them online so that. As you mentioned earlier, that there was one point of time where Hands on Atlanta, where people used to hand posters and then tell people that there's a volunteer service needed. And so would Hands on Atlanta further go into that venture, which is, I think, developing an app such as that wouldn't really cost much, but it would surely have an impact, and it would be a quicker connection between the two.
Yeah, so and the short answer is right now we use a technology program. Is anyone familiar with Salesforce.com? Some nods. All right, so Salesforce.com is a big technology organization. We have a technology program called Hands on Connect, which allows us to manage the 3,500, 4,000 volunteer projects that we work kind of in any given year. And it helps us democratize the access to that to our 200 nonprofits. And so we train up our nonprofits on how to use our technology. They load up their needs, we vet those needs, and then we serve those up on a database. Right now, it isn't an app, but it is like what the new website is mobile friendly. And so the step we've taken towards that is to at least make our access to our volunteer projects mobile friendly. And it's a long way to go to kind of reduce that friction. There's still a lot of friction in that process that needs to get out of there. But an app is on the roadmap. It's just taking us a little longer to get there. Alan.
We have one last question.
One last question. Make it a hard one.
There you go.
Y'all have been great. Thank you.
Hi. So with companies like State Farm that market or advertise for contributing to their social responsibility, how do those companies measure their social impact, so to say?
Yeah, so two questions. One is how does State Farm measure their social impact, and then how do we measure ours? The State Farm one is really hard. What I'll tell you is we've worked with their marketing agency. So this is an example where I mentioned a lot of times companies will come to us and say, hey, can we engage your help in helping us organize a service project for our employees? State Farm marketing agency, they're called the marketing arm, came to us and said, we want to organize a 500-person project for the community to do something around food insecurity. Can you guys manage that for us? And they brought this artist, Joy Williams, in. They brought a celebrity chef in. They had a DJ. They turned our space into this amazing stuff. They had no employees show up. Their entire marketing budget was simply, how do we get impressions? So their marketing department is simply measuring eyeballs. They're saying, how does this message resonate with our potential consumers in order to drive them to ultimately increase our business. So that's an example. Like this is not driven by their CSR department. It's not driven by their sustainability department. It's not intersected with that because there is typically a firewall between an organization's foundation, because it tends to be a nonprofit status, and then their business. And you can't give money to your nonprofit and then have the nonprofit do something that then helps your business. That's kind of embezzlement, basically. And so that's frowned upon. And so a lot of times, if marketing is driving an effort, for State Farm as an example, their initiative is not necessarily tied to their CSR and sustainability efforts. So I don't know about how their CSR department views this internally. I'm not intersecting with them in that way, but they're all different. Every organization has their unique ways of measuring it. For us, we look at a couple of things. We look at the biggest metric for us is how many people are we engaging in service. And we use that as a proxy for impact. And so it's hard for us, because we're agnostic to different issues, it's hard for us to say, you know what, we're moving the needle on this particular issue, on child hunger, or on animal well-being, or on the environment, because we support so many organizations. Like, we're a mile wide and an inch deep. And so we use how many people are we engaging in service, how many lifelong community volunteers are we creating, and what is the value of that service over time. And that's the way we look at our impact. In a couple of our programs, I would add, we are deeply involved with Atlanta Public Schools, and in those programs, we do manage a case management system. So we will look at the interventions we're providing to a first, second, third grader, and what are their test scores and educational outcomes over time. And so we do more of a longitudinal assessment to make sure that what we're doing in the classroom with students as volunteers is actually helping their outcomes as compared to other interventions. But aside from that one area, it's harder for us to measure impact in a really precise way. We used to count economic value, but I didn't like the math. There is a dollar that the Corporation for National and Community Service provides. I think it's somewhere in the $26 an hour range, and that goes up if you talk about skills-based volunteering. And so you could do the math of 200,000 hours times 26. But I don't know, it wasn't a big enough number to say we're driving this amount of impact in the community. And so what I'd rather say is for every dollar that we're given, we can generate about $6 of a return. And so that's kind of the math that I like.
So let's give another round of applause to our speaker, Jay Cranman.
Thank you, guys.
As a token of our gratitude, we have a small gift for you. Amy will give that to you. And on behalf of the ILE, thanks everyone for coming and attending our talk. And please make sure you keep on coming to our future talks on Wednesdays from 4:30 to 5:30.